All right, welcome to episode 304 of Backpacking America. Obviously, Donald Trump won the 2024 presidential election. I wanted to wait till after the election to make an episode to really see what was going on with the country. And I will say that I'm very impressed with most of the things he's done. The only thing I'm really against that he has been doing is the trying to get rid of birthright citizenship. That's obviously against the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. It's as clear as day. It's as clear as the Second Amendment of the Constitution. I don't think we should be playing around with constitutional amendments. I did want to get that out there as the first thing in this episode. Other than that, I've been pretty much in love with everything that he's been doing. He's done more in, I don't know, what is it, it's December 12th. He's done more in a month and a half than President Biden has done in 4 years. And the effects of his presidency, of President Trump's presidency, can be felt on a day-to-day basis and tangible, whereas President Biden's orders have either not been felt, or if they have been felt, it's been hurting my wallet. When President Trump won, my business went off the hook. I've been getting phone calls nonstop. I've had meetings nonstop. I really do attribute his presidential win to a lot of small businesses' success. A lot of small businesses have been feeling the same. There are a few things that I wanted to talk about today. I want to talk about the Gulf of America being renamed, tariffs, and the potential annexation or purchase of Canada, Greenland, and Panama Canal, and the potential to clean up Mexico. So I want to start off with the Gulf of America. A lot of people think it's stupid, and they think that it's silly and just virtue signaling or whatever, but I think it's really important because what Trump's trying to do, well, there's two reasons why it's important. One, President Biden's executive orders on the prohibition of drilling in the Gulf of Mexico are essentially null and void because now it's officially called the Gulf of America. So that regulation of the Gulf of Mexico preventing drilling offshore is pretty much null and void at that point because the legal name has been changed, and it's like the treaties with the Soviet Union pretty much expiring when the Soviet Union became the Russian Federation. So, a lot of the regulations against oil drilling in the Gulf of Mexico are pretty much null and void because of this renaming. Number two, it's just showing American muscle and our are going back to our roots of expansionism, growing the country, American pride, and really putting ourselves on the international stage and saying this is our land, it's not yours. Something that's been lost in the last 20 to 30 years of our country's history. Mostly because of liberal pandering and neocons' obsession with the desert. So I think calling the Gulf of America is just one of those steps to bringing America back into the, us being a regional power and cementing that, because why is it called the Gulf of Mexico if Mexico can't even defend it? Mexico can't even defend itself. And this kind of takes us into our next topic of, cleaning up Mexico, where Mexico is pretty much a narco state. There's very few areas of government control, and those areas of government control are in the major cities. But in the rural areas and the areas that connect the major cities, it's all cartels. A lot of the police and the military are bought out by the cartel or are cartel members or former cartel members. A lot of government officials are purchased by the cartel to just turn a blind eye to the trafficking of human beings, children, drugs. So Mexico is quickly becoming an unstable narco state with, on the border of one of the most powerful countries in the world. And they're using our graces and goodwill of being a center for refugees and immigrants to push people over our border that are going to expand their criminal empire, commit acts of terrorism, or acts of espionage against the United States. There have been multiple ISIS agents that have been captured crossing our border. There have been Chinese spies and Chinese military agents that have been captured from crossing our border. And then there's been Tren de Aragua and MS-13, which crossed over our border. And Tren de Aragua is even worse than MS-13 because, in my opinion, because they actually take over control of apartment complexes and stores and communities and start selling drugs that way. They're taking over physical land, whereas MS-13 was more just the Crips or the Bloods. They're just like another street gang. Vicious, very vicious, but they didn't hold firm territory like Tren de Aragua was doing. So cleaning up Mexico First off, what Trump did with the tariffs against Mexico was wonderful because they ended up committing 10,000 National Guard troops specifically to the border. The liberals will say, oh, well, they were already doing border patrol in Mexico. What are you talking about? Well, they were doing border patrol throughout the country. Yes, they were, stopping illegals and busting up cartels and such, but physically manning the border with their National Guard, that was something that was not commonplace throughout the entire border. So now, the United States is putting 10,000 Marines and Border Patrol agents directly on the border to protect the border. Mexico is now doing the same thing. So now the border strength the cartels have to account for is now 20,000 or more armed personnel instead of 10,000 on our side. So Mexico is matching our force projection on the border. That's the first thing that was done with the tariffs. And that's all he's doing with the tariffs. He's saying we want a good deal for American manufacturing and the American worker, obviously, but we also want the flow of fentanyl to stop, and we want the flow of illegal migrants to stop too. So that's why those tariffs were put in place. And Mexico folded within 24 hours and said, okay, that's very reasonable, we'll do that. And the same was done for Canada because cartels and terrorist organizations have been infiltrating our northern border as well. It's just a border that's not really talked about because there's not as much volume coming over that border as is in Mexico. Nor is it really, abnormal to have wide traffic over the Canadian-American border because of the long-standing relationship between our two countries. Inter-border travel has been basically as smooth as crossing from one state to another, almost as smooth. So that's why it's not really focused on. And then, of course, there's the stereotypical end of it, and then also the severity end of it too. Like stereotypically, you're like, oh no, because the United States has always had beef with Mexico ever since their revolution to be a republic in the 1870s. It devolved into many times criminal enterprise. So Pancho Villa, we've had revolutionaries try to cross the border and take over Texas. We had the Zimmerman telegram in the First World War. Mexico's always been like a wild card for the American border relationship, but overall, we've been stable with Mexico. It's just non-governmental forces in Mexico that have been the cause of some concern and controversy. That's why we focus so much on the southern border. But Mexico committed to putting troops on that border, and we need to work with the Mexican government to really clean up Mexico. I mean, we should bomb the cartels. We should go in there, send in the special forces, the Marines, village to village, getting rid of the narco labs, getting rid of the narco runways, and really just, I would even say, stationing American personnel in Mexico to assist the Mexican government in cleaning it up. And also, the Mexican government would then have the ability to start rooting out corrupt politicians that the cartels paid off. And really, they should discern between who just accepted money to get themselves richer and who was threatened at gunpoint to accept money or bribes or whatever else to do whatever the cartels want. Because there's victims in this too, and victims can be politicians and policemen and military personnel. So really just discerning, who's doing it to enrich themselves and who's doing it because they were afraid of their lives or their children's lives. So Mexico needs American military assistance for sure. The annexation of Canada, I'm sure my Canadian viewers and more my liberal viewers are going to hate this, but I really think we should annex Canada. We should annex Canada, and hear me out, because Canada is pretty much America. There's a difference between, and I don't think we should annex Mexico either. And there's two reasons why. First, Mexico has a distinct culture, a different language than us, and they have a lot of domestic terrorism problems and cartel problems and crime problems. We cannot inherit that mess. And then also they're a different culture than us. Mexico and America culturally have nothing in common. But they're like our cousin from another mother or a removed cousin or whatever. We fuck with them, but just you can't be with us like that, But Canada's like our first cousin or our little brother. They could come sleep over at the crib anytime they want. The cultures are very similar. Canada is, I often wonder this too. What is a Canadian? What is a Canadian? Seriously, I don't know what a Canadian is, not an American. You listen to them talk, they're kind of like New Yorkers and people from Massachusetts and Maine. They have like a similar accent. They have a really rich sports history, like we have a rich sports history. They have a great, economy. But that's it. There's nothing really that changes, the Canadian identity. Like if you were to talk about like the Toronto Blue Jays play in the Major League Baseball leagues. I mean, and then the National Hockey League, Canadian teams play with American teams. So it's just like even American sports, really the Canadian sports world is American. They're very Americanized. Toronto is basically like a New England small city. There's really no difference. If you put a blindfold over my head and you dropped me in a part of Canada, in British Canada, I'd wake up and be like, oh, I'm in America. The only part of Canada, the only province in Canada that has its own unique identity is Quebec. And that's French Canada, and their whole identity is being French. Not Canadian, not American, French. So they're more related to their French motherland than they are the land they're currently on or the United States. So the only, when you say what is a Canadian, you think of a Frenchman. I mean, that's not Canadian. So the Canadians don't even have any sense of national identity, nor do I think they actually want to. And when I think of a proud and strong Canada, I don't think of, Trudeau's Canada or the Canada of 20 years ago. I think of the Dominion of Canada from World War I, World War II, where they had, a distinct European English colonial identity, where they wanted to remain close to the crown, and they held crown ideals. That's what a Canadian is to me, like the Mounties, the mounted policeman with the red jacket and everything. That's Canadian. And it's very stereotypical, but isn't America my perception of what a Canadian is. No one really knows what a Canadian is. There's actually the Ontario put out a ad that's been running in the Northeast for a long time. They actually put it in the Super Bowl, supposedly, where it's basically saying, it was pretty passive-aggressive, but it's like, this neighbor to the north has been with America since World War I and World War II and blah, blah, blah. We have a close trade partnership, but this is the problem. Their whole identity that they're asserting is that we've been a good American ally. We've been close to America. And that's it. It's not asserting a separation from America and Canada and coalescing together on common ground. It's just our whole identity has been being your ally or a puppet of England. So it's just kind of like, what is a Canadian? They'd fit right into the United States. They really would. And it's only 40 million people in Canada across that whole thing. And this leads to my next point. The Chinese and the Russians have been really pushing for Arctic dominance for quite some time. And Canada doesn't have the means to defend Canada. We defend Canada. The United States military defends Canada. Yes, they're NATO allies, of course, so we would defend them anyway, but we have to defend the Arctic because the Chinese and the Russians keep sending warships and icebreaker ships through the Arctic to control the area. Because if you didn't know this, the Arctic has some of the world's largest untapped oil reserves. So leaving that in jeopardy of being dominated because we're respecting the sovereignty of a state that can barely maintain its sovereignty on its own, nor has any conception of what its identity is, it's really a strategic blunder on the part of NATO, the Canadian people, and the American people. So I think Canada should absolutely be a part of the United States. They'd have lower taxes. They would get a Second Amendment. They would have stronger free speech protections. They would have, they'd be militarily protected. They wouldn't have to worry about shit, and they benefit from a really strong economy. And Canada on its own, I think, is maybe the 15th or 10th largest economy in the world. I'm not really too sure. but they would instantly become wealthier just by being a part of the United States. And it's a big landmass of a country, but they only live like on the borders of like some of the northern states and Detroit. That's it. There's not really many, areas where Canadians live except close to the United States. That's also why a unique Canadian identity hasn't really been developed, because their closest neighbors are Americans, even though they have like this whole land mass. Most of it's uninhabitable, to be honest with you. And then another, that point that I made about military defense also applies to Greenland, because Denmark, of all countries especially, forget Canada, barely has a military. They cannot defend Greenland when Greenland is a 40,000 population. Greenland is half the size of Canada and has the population of maybe Binghamton, New York, or one town on Long Island. Literally, maybe the town of like Huntington or Lindenhurst is basically the population living on Greenland, because Greenland is 40,000 people. So it makes absolute sense for us to purchase or take over Greenland, because they can't defend themselves from Russian aggression. We have to defend them from Russian aggression. In fact, we have 3 military bases on Greenland already. So it's like we have to defend all of these countries that can't defend themselves, don't know who they are, and barely have any sort of like will to fight. So we might as well just have them. Obviously, no one wants military force, but it just makes sense from a strategic point of view. We'd be able to defend American territory much easier through acts of Congress, laws, and through direct conflict and indirect conflict than by defending a foreign nation. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I don't want to die for Greenland or Canada, but I would risk my life to defend the United States. It's just even a psychological component. Like, we would be able to defend these countries and these territories better if they were ours for psychological, economic, and political reasons. And then, of course, we're talking about, the Panama Canal, where Panama said, we're not going to let the United States travel for free through this. We can use whatever managing partner for the canal we want. Donald Trump put a tariff. Panama said, of course, Mr. Trump, you can move your ships through for free at any given time, and we will find a new managing partner, because the people managing the Panama Canal were not the Panamese, or Panamese, whatever the fuck they're called. It was the Chinese. And that's against the charter for when we handed over the Panama Canal under Jimmy Carter, God rest his soul. The stipulation was that Panama would use a neutral maintenance authority. They wouldn't use a hostile or foreign country or a NATO or non-NATO country. They would use a neutral country. So like Switzerland or Nicaragua or like, Algeria, someone that like has no stake in the political world, because they don't want the passage of the canal to be jeopardized by geopolitical changes and war and so on and so forth. So, because that canal is really important to global trade, especially American trade, and we built the fucking canal. So Trump's whole thing was, well, we built the thing, we should at least get free passage. We lost thousands of people building it, and it was ours until 1970 when we gave it away like morons, which it's a very stupid thing to do. So Trump was like, listen, we're going to put tariffs on you. And there's also a stipulation too in the contract, and this is why he was threatening military action against Panama. In the contract of handing it over, if Panama violates the terms of the contract by giving it to a non-neutral party to manage, we can militarily intervene and take over the canal for ourselves. That was also put in the contract. The Panamanians signed it, Jimmy Carter signed it, and Donald Trump said, you're in violation of this, so we're going to put a tariff on you. But if you still don't comply, we're going to send in the military and take over the canal. So that's particularly what was going on with that. And that's a good thing. And tariffs worked every single time with this, by the way. There are currently no tariffs active. There are currently no tariffs active against any country in the previous mentioned countries that I listed off. No active tariffs. They were threatened for a day, and then it stopped. Now, quickly, people are going to talk about the price of eggs and the price of goods not going down, so on and so forth. First off, I paid $2.59 for gas recently. Gas prices are going down. Eggs are not going down because there's an avian bird flu. There is a bird flu. Eggs are getting affected. Now, where do I think the bird flu came from? I don't know. I'm going to assume the Chinese or a terrorist organization or maybe someone in our own government. I don't know. But it's just very weird how biological disasters happen under the Trump administration in an attempt to make them look bad. COVID. What was I going to say? The plane crashes. There have been many, many, many domestic plane crashes in the United States since he's taken office. I think similar people trying to sow the destruction of his presidency are pushing this, these accidents. I don't think it was anything to do with an accident because there was a plane crash for 9 days straight. One plane crashed every day for 9 days. And that's not a coincidence or an accident. Could it be from a poor manufacturing of aircraft? Absolutely. Could it be, people in the government trying to cause disasters as much as possible to make Trump look bad? Absolutely. Could it be foreign actors trying to do the same thing? Absolutely. Do we know who did it? No fucking clue. But those are the things I just wanted to put out there before I end the episode. Anyway, this was episode 304 of Backpack America. Thank you for listening. And it's good to get back on the political rants. I haven't done one of those in a very long time. For those of you that have known me since the podcast started, obviously my politics changed a lot. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, thank you for listening to episode 304 of Backpack America, and until next time.